Right now, you are probably counting without being aware of it. The number of days left before the holidays start, how much pocket money you have left, how many times you fell in love. Your brain is tagging, quantifying, and filing numbers so automatically that you experience it as silence, as something completely ordinary, as just thinking. But what if that silence never existed? What if the part of your mind that reaches for numbers simply had nothing to reach for?
There is a small group of people living along the Maichi River in the Brazilian Amazon for whom this is not a thought experiment. It is just life. These people are the pirahã, around 400 people, one of the most isolated communities on Earth. And the language they speak has quietly dismantled nearly every assumption that modern linguistics was built on. It has no words for exact numbers. None. Not one, not two, not three. There is a word that means roughly a small amount, and a word that means roughly a larger amount. That is the entire numerical vocabulary of a language that has existed, fully functional, for as long as anyone can trace. The pirahã do not count. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they are primitive, but because their language never developed the scaffolding, and their world, as they live it, never required it. And here is where it starts to get strange.
In 2004, a cognitive scientist called Peter Gordon published a study in the journal Science that sent a quiet earthquake through linguistics and cognitive psychology. Gordon had worked with the pirahã and designed a series of matching tasks. He would place a number of objects on a table and ask pirahã participants to match the quantity with objects of their own. Simple tasks that any child in a numerate culture handles effortlessly at age 3 or 4. The pirahã could match quantities of 1 and 2 fairly reliably. At 3, accuracy began to drop. By 7 or 8 objects, performance was close to random. This was not a failure of perception. Their eyes worked perfectly. They could see that the piles were different sizes. What they could not do was hold an exact number in mind, because their language gave them no container to hold it in. Gordon's conclusion was stark. Language, or its absence, was shaping the very capacity to think numerically. Not just expressing thought, shaping it, constraining it, determining what kinds of cognition were even available. This placed the pirahã at the center of one of the oldest debates in the study of the human mind, the question of whether language creates thought or merely carries it.
The idea that language shapes thought is not new. Benjamin Lee Whorf, an American linguist writing in the 1930s and 40s, proposed what became known as linguistic relativity. The weak version of this hypothesis, the one most linguists were willing to accept, said that language influences how easily you think certain thoughts. The strong version said something far more radical, that without the words, certain thoughts are simply impossible. For decades, the strong version was considered fringe, an interesting provocation without solid evidence. Then the pirahã arrived in the scientific literature, and the debate reopened with new intensity.
Because the numbers finding was only the beginning. The pirahã language has no color terms, not in the way every other studied language on Earth has them. Where English has red, blue, green, yellow, the pirahã describe color periphrastically. They might say something like, the word that describes blood, or the word that describes the sky. Color is not a category the language carves up and names. And just as with numbers, researchers found that color discrimination tasks were harder for pirahã speakers in the zones where their language drew no distinctions. The language also has no fixed tense system in the conventional sense, no recursive grammar, which had been proposed by Noam Chomsky as a universal feature of all human language, the ability to nest clauses inside clauses infinitely, the structure that allows you to say, the man who knew the woman who found the dog that bit the child. The pirahã do not do this. Their sentences are short, immediate, grounded in directly observable or directly experienced reality. Danieleverett, a linguist who spent decades living with the pirahã beginning in the 1970s, documented all of this in meticulous detail. His findings, published in a 2005 paper in the journal Current Anthropology, were among the most contested in the history of the field. Chomsky and his colleagues pushed back hard. The argument was not merely academic. If Chomsky's theory of universal grammar was correct, then every human language had to share certain deep structural features. The pirahã, as Everett described them, appeared to share almost none.
What Everett proposed was that the pirahã language was shaped by a cultural principle he called immediacy of experience. The pirahã, he argued, place an extraordinary value on direct personal experience. They do not tell stories about things they did not witness themselves. They do not speak of abstract futures or distant pasts. Their language, their stories, their entire communicative world is anchored in what is present, visible, and real right now.
Numbers are not present. Numbers are abstractions. The quantity 7 does not exist in the forest. There are 7 fish, but 7 itself is invisible, and the pirahã language has no use for invisible things. Just think about that for a minute.
You live inside a civilization that is almost entirely constructed from invisible things. Prices, contracts, scheduled times, interest rates, promises about the future, laws that govern behavior that has not yet happened. Every one of these requires the ability to hold abstractions in your mind as real, to treat the number in a bank account as genuinely meaningful, even though it exists nowhere in physical space.
The pirahã have built a life, a functioning, rich, socially complex life, without any of that infrastructure. Not because they failed to develop it, but because the way they have chosen to live, rooted in immediate experience, immediate community, immediate reality, made it unnecessary. The way your mind works, the categories it carves reality into, the distinctions it considers obvious and natural and universal, are not universal. They are the residue of the language you absorbed before you could speak. Every word you learned shaped a cognitive container. Every container filled with a concept that now feels as solid and inevitable as gravity. The pirahã speak a language that carved different containers, or left many of the containers your mind reaches for completely empty. Right now, you are probably picturing them as lacking something. But maybe, just maybe, that is not a deficiency. Maybe it is a reminder that the map you are using to navigate reality, the one made of numbers and colors and nested clauses and abstractions reaching 30 years into the future, is just one map among others. Right now, without knowing it, you are still counting. And somewhere along the Maisi River, someone is watching a fish move through water, with no word for how many there are and no need for one.